Hi, I'm Uday Halbe, Professor of Civil Engineering specializing in structures, and today I'm going to show you the experiments that the students in CE's 361 Structural Analysis 1 lab conduct. So here is my first setup. It's a 30-inch beam which is centered on these two supports, and we zero the balances so that we are not accounting for self-weight of the beam. And now what students do is they can use 5-pound weights and they can put it as concentrated load either in the middle, and they can see what the reactions would be, or they can put it off center like an asymmetric setup, and they can see what the reactions would be. We give them tape measures so they can measure the distances here. They can calculate the reactions theoretically, but they can also verify it experimentally. We also have capability of applying uniformly distributed load. So what we have is cut steel bars, and if you just lay them over the length of the beam, you get a uniformly distributed load covering the entire span, and that is, we have measured the weight is 0.27 pounds per inch. Now they also have an option of just covering part of the span, and then they can again take the tape measure, see what portion of the beam has been loaded, calculate the reactions theoretically, and compare with experimental results. So this is the first static equilibrium, principles of static equilibrium lab. In this lab, we are using flexible beams so students can see the deflected shape of beams under actions of different kinds of loads, point loads and distributed loads. So two supports here are fixed, so they do not allow any rotation. And now I'm going to show you how we can apply the load in this setup. So you can apply one load here, another load here. So you have 2 point loads, and the students are able to identify the inflection points, which are somewhere here, and we give them tape measures so they can actually measure the location to the inflection points. But we can take this beam and also apply distributed load if we want, and we could see how the beam deflects under uniformly distributed load, and whether the inflection point locations change between point load and distributed load, and how the inflection points are changing with the application of 2 point loads versus moving one of these to the center and just doing 1 point load. So they can do various things with this setup. So in this lab, the students are looking at the behavior of frames, and these are all indeterminate frames. All these frames are fixed at the base, but there are some differences here between the three frames. The frame in the center has all three members with the same cross section, same moment of inertia, and we are giving the students polycarbonate frames so they can see the deflection behavior, so they can study the deflection behavior under a concentrated load, and they can see how the beams deflect, how the columns deflect, where there is an inflection point, so they can see all that. We have a multi-story building frame, again made out of polycarbonate material, so the students can observe the deflected shape of the beams and the columns, and we have the ability to apply loads for the different beams. For example, I'm hanging 5-pound loads here, and you can see that the frame is deflecting, but we want the students to see the deflected shapes. So one of the things they can see under point loads is how the beam curvature is changing, and you have compression on the top in the middle part, compression on the bottom towards the joint. In between, they can measure the inflection points, and we give them a measuring tape so they can actually measure it, and then they can do analysis of this frame using research computer software. Now, in addition to this frame, we also have other frames here. This one is a one-story frame with 3 bays. So this is another frame they can test under vertical and lateral loading. And we also have a frame which is 3-story, and it also can be tested under vertical and lateral loads. And students do analysis of these different frames. What we have is a loading setup, and we can test beams in 1-point bending or 2-point bending. This is a composite beam, fiber reinforced polymer composite I-section, and we are loading it here. We have capacity to go up to 2 tons here, but we typically limit ourselves to 1 kip, 1,000 pounds. And the loading jack is manual. And before we start loading, we need to connect the load cells to our data acquisition system. So I will show you our data acquisition system here. This data acquisition system is VSA System 7000, and it has 8 channels. So I just plugged in the load cell, and I have ability to plug in multiple strain gauges. So all these strain gauges are connected here at the top and at the bottom. And some of the setups, we also use strain gauges in the middle to measure shear. So the top is the compression flange here, bottom is the tension flange. And for the different gauges, we have the numbered Ethernet cables, and we can just connect these here one by one. We also have a laptop here, and the laptop is connected through an Ethernet cable to this data acquisition box, and the laptop can run Strain Smart software and acquire the load cell data and acquire the strain gauge data while a student is pumping the loading jack. So that way we don't have to measure the load from the loading jack itself. There is a load cell here at the top, and that sends the load data into the strain data acquisition system, and then the sensors, the strain gauges, are sending data in there. Now we also have an option to connect LVDTs. So here you have a LVDT, so we could position this with a clamp and measure the deflection as the beam moves down, and we can measure data in milli-inches, the deflections in milli-inches. So we can attach a clamp here and then do the deflection test. So this one is a 3-point bending test, also known as 1-point bending test. And we also have capacity to do 2-point or 4-point bending test using the spreader beam. And these can be detached. We can use different lengths there, different lengths. Some are longer, like this one. So we can do different test setups here. Yeah, there are certain safety protocols that students have to follow when they do tests in this lab. As you can see, we encourage them to wear safety glasses. But the major safety concern we have is these weights falling off the table or rolling off the table if they are not put correctly and hitting them on their legs. So we actually require everybody to wear closed-toe shoes in the lab. That way they have at least some protection from falling weights. We also go over the safety, load safety, and tell them to be careful with all these weights they are applying. So when they hang the load and they take it out, they are supposed to put it upright, not let it roll off the table. So we do train them on basic safety before they start their experiments.